Good afternoon, and welcome to the first webinar organized by the Arts Committee of the FINEX Research and Development Foundation. The Arts Committee is led by Mona Polencia, our liaison trustee, and by Domingo Go, our committee chair. They are the Starsky and Hutch of FINEX. Some people think that art is a frivolity that has no place in a pandemic such as what we're experiencing at this time. But we in the Arts Committee beg to disagree. And these presentations this afternoon will put a shine on art at the time of pandemic. Let me start our program by calling on Attorney Lia San Juan to deliver the invocation and lead us in the singing of the national anthem. Lia?
Yes, thank you, Malu. May I request everyone to join me in prayer? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, thank you for all the blessings you have bestowed upon us and for allowing us to share our knowledge and time with each other. May you extend your divine wisdom to our speakers so that they may be able to participate and effectively impart their knowledge to all of us. Bless the participants as well so that they may gain helpful information from this activity. We also say a special prayer for all those who are suffering from this crisis. We beg you to heal those who are sick and give peace to the dying. Grant eternal rest to those who have died from this virus and comfort to their families and friends. Give strength and courage to our doctors, nurses, and other frontliners. And finally, please give our leaders and public officials the wisdom and compassion to make the right decisions for our country and people. All this we ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Let us now put our right hand over our heart and join in the singing of the national anthem. In addition to imparting knowledge to our members and guests about the state of the arts during this time of crisis, through this webinar, the FINEX Foundation is also trying to generate support for our sectors adversely affected by the COVID pandemic. Today's webinar is part of a fundraising effort of the FINEX Foundation, the proceeds of which will be donated to the ABS-CBN Foundation and the Philippine Disaster Relief Foundation. Every donation you will make will be matched by the FINEX Foundation up to a total amount of 1 million pesos and donated equally to these two foundations. On your screen right now are the details of the accounts where donations may be made. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lia. We will now proceed with the next item in our program, and I'd like to call on the chair of the FINEX Research and Development Foundation, Attorney Ebot Tan, for his welcome remarks. Ebot?
Yes, friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this afternoon's webinar brought to you by the FINEX Foundation's Arts Committee with Mona Polencia as Liaison Director and Domingo as Committee Chair. This afternoon, we shall dwell on the topic, art during the time of pandemics. Today's program promises to be a refreshing and relaxing respite from the usual webinars we have all been exposed to during the ECQ lockdown over the past several weeks. We have assembled a group of very interesting and knowledgeable speakers who have graciously consented to spend their valuable time with us this afternoon to share with us their knowledge, ideas, perspectives, and experience on the aforementioned topic. We have with us Ms. Regina Mercedes Cruz, Deputy Director of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Museum Corporate Affairs Office, who will speak on art history during pandemics. We also have with us Mr. Joaquin Teotico, an art dealer and the owner of Galerie Joaquin, who will discuss what will happen to the art market post-COVID-19. Finally, we will have Mr. Rico Hizon, CNN Philippines Senior Anchor and Director for Content Development, who will share with us his views on how art helps him get through the crisis. Indeed, we have a very interesting, we will have very interesting presentations and speakers lined up for you today. I would like to thank our Arts Committee, more particularly Mon, Doming, Malu, and Leah, as well as our FINEX Secretariat for putting this program together for all of us. As was mentioned by Leah earlier, while the FINEX Foundation is presenting this webinar for free to all participants, we would like to invite and encourage all of you to make a small donation to the FINEX Foundation for the benefit of our healthcare frontliners and the less privileged sectors of our society who have been very adversely affected by this pandemic. The FINEX Foundation, as was mentioned, will match any amount you may donate up to 1 million pesos. If you have any difficulty in making your donation, please contact the FINEX Secretariat as to how you can make your donation or pledge the same. I now invite you to please sit back, listen, watch, and enjoy the presentations this afternoon. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Let us all keep well and stay safe. Mabuhay ang FINEX, mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Ebot. And this is indeed a webinar for a worthy cause. You know, we're quite fortunate to have for this webinar 3 prominent names in the field of art. We have an art historian, an art dealer, and an art collector. One knows that the person has achieved a high level of prominence in his field when he can be identified by just a nickname. Such is the case with our first speaker. Mention the name Jeannie in the art community, and that can only refer to Regina Mercedes Cruz, Deputy Director of the BSP Museum Corporate Affairs Office. At various times, Jeannie was managing editor of the Artists Association of the Philippines. She was senior lecturer, De La Salle College of St. Benilde, and professorial lecturer, University of the Philippines, College of Arts and Letters, Department of Art Studies. Jeannie is an acknowledged expert and a go-to person for anything about art. And rightly so. After all, Jeannie has, if I may use the term, the right pedigree for it. After completing her BS Psychology course in UP, Jeannie went to George Washington University, where she completed a Bachelor of Arts degree major in art history with distinction. Jeannie then took a further step in her education at the University of Kansas, where she obtained a Master of Arts in History of Art degree, and from there pursued her PhD in History of Art. Also tucked in Jeannie's belt is a certificate or diploma in museum studies and in fine and decorative arts appraisal from New York University. And so, ladies and gentlemen, when we view the art pieces in the BSP Museum, let us remember that these art pieces have been curated by a very highly trained professional with top-notch academic credentials. Now, most of us in business like to say that we are left-brained, and we tend to regard those in the arts as right-brained. But our second speaker, Joaquin Teotico, is one of those few exceptions to this dichotomy, and we can rightly declare that he is both left and right brain dominant. Consider this. Jack did corporate acquisitions and investments in Bancom, an investment house, early in his career. Thereafter, he worked at the Department of Agriculture as senior consultant for export crops and international trade negotiations, and at the Fiber Industry Development Authority as administrator. Now, after 23 years in government, Jack decided to follow his bliss and pursue his passion in the arts. At various times, he was a member of the Saturday Group of Artists, which included among its members Ben Cab and Ang Kyu Kok. He was a writer for selected newspapers and magazines on arts and culture. He was an art magazine publisher. He was founding trustee of the Malacanang Heritage Foundation and chair of the Board of Trustees of Fundación Sanso. But what allowed Jack to best blend the logical and the creative was when he became the founding chair of the Galerie Joaquin group, which now counts as partner 6 galleries and joint venture arrangements. Jack obtained his Bachelor of Science in Business Economics degree from UP and his Master's in Business Economics from UANP. I should mention that Jack went to LaSalle for elementary and high school, and lest our Jesuit-educated friends feel left out, Jack actually completed his kindergarten in Ateneo de Davao. Maybe Jack should have taken also law in San Beda to kind of round it all up. Our third speaker, Rico Hizon, is a balikbayan. He was for many years with CNBC and then with BBC, gaining the distinction of being the first Filipino news anchor to work for 2 of the world's most prestigious TV news networks. He is now senior anchor and director for news content of CNN Philippines. You can catch Rico every night at 9 o'clock for his news program in CNN Philippines. Rico started his career in GMA Network, covering the capital markets, banking, finance, real estate, and corporate developments. His achievements in the field earned for him an award as one of the outstanding young men for broadcast journalism. Rico obtained the degree in communication arts and business from De La Salle University. He was granted a doctorate degree in humanities honoris causa by the University of Northeastern Philippines. So what is a prominent news anchor doing in a webinar on the art during the time of pandemics? Rico has a discerning eye and has been an avid and renowned art collector for more than 2 decades. Now, before I call on the first speaker to make his presentation, let me just do a bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions that you wish to raise, please, you will see a Q&A button below your screen, and you can then click that and type your questions. We will raise your questions in the Q&A portion of the program after the 3 presentations have been done. So let me now call on the first speaker, Regina Cruz, for her presentation. Jeannie?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to FINEX for allowing us to share some thoughts during this time of stay-at-home period. The title of this presentation is called Mindfulness of Death, And when I say mindfulness, it's most likely, it's more the awareness of death during the time of plagues and pandemics. Now, plagues actually have been with us for quite some time. And the name plague was coined by the physician, the Greek physician Galen, who lived during the Antonine plague of the 2nd century CE, Common Era. Now, there are several plagues throughout history, and in this presentation, we're just choosing, some that are more, when you say more prominent than others, or some that have high death rates, I would say. And that spurred art also that was reflected in the art of the period. Now, plagues actually, the cause of plagues, people thought then plagues were actually caused by supernatural, they were supernatural in origin as a punishment from the gods or because of the sin of the people. And it was only in the 19th century, mind you, 1894. What was happening in the Philippines, 1894? We were starting to revolt against Spain during that period, when a Hong Kong-based French-Swiss bacteriologist, Dr. Yersin, actually discovered the cause of the plague. And so this bacteria is named after him, called Yersinia pestis. But before that, people thought plagues would come from, the air, from putrid odor and all that. So we have that thing called miasma. So let me start, and I'll show you the first one. So the first plague I'm going to discuss, actually, where art was presented, is the Justinian plague. Now, this was actually done, this happened around 541 CE and vanished towards 750. So it was around 200 years before it disappeared. And apparently the death toll, they say, was around 50 million people at that time. Now, who was Justinian? He is the person here in the middle. Justinian was actually the emperor and is credited to be the most influential of the Byzantine emperors. And it's also, his reign was the one that coincided with the first well-documented plague in history. And so this particular pandemic was supposed to have started in Africa and spread through Europe through rats brought in by mercantile ships. And the height of the plague in Constantinople, people were dying at 10,000 per day, 10,000 bodies per day. Now, how did the plague spread? They said that it spread because people in the countryside were were starving also, and they were looking for assistance. And so they came to the cities. And of course, when they come to the cities, they bring their stuff with them, and also the rats and also all the things. So this particular plague, they now say, is a combination of bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic plagues. So there are differences. So bubonic, we know, caused by carrier fleas, and it attacks the lymph nodes. And the other one, septicemic, through fleas, and it attacks the bloodstream. And pneumonic infects the lungs. So I'm presenting this to you just to show you who Justinian was. This is actually a mosaic in the Church of Ravenna in Italy. And if you have a chance to go, this is also one of the most beautifully preserved mosaics in the world. And it's, I think, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, what was happening? People were now trying to show what was happening to themselves. So they have here, and this is a monk administering to the plagues, to the victims of the plague. When we see pictures like this, especially of the faces, this is actually, they see it's, all these dots that you see. Later on, they said that the dots that you see are actually not, excuse me, manifestation of bubonic plague, but actually leprosy. So the way the people were being presented then was actually as lepers. Next, we go to another person who became very famous. And this is actually Mantegna's Saint Sebastian. Now, who was Saint Sebastian? He was a 3rd century martyr who was martyred by Diocletian, an emperor of the Roman Empire, because he was a Christian. And Diocletian wanted him to give up his Christian faith and go back to the Roman gods. He refused, so Diocletian said to tie him to a stake and pierce him with arrows. Sebastian actually survived that. And later on, Diocletian then had him, ordered him again to be, he was beaten to death with clubs. So his body will not be found. Diocletian had him thrown to the sewers of Rome. But somebody found him in the sewers of Rome and brought him to the catacombs and was laid at the feet of Saints Peter and Paul. Now, later on, the Venetians actually steal his body from the catacombs and bring him to Venice. Now, why is Saint Sebastian here featured as a saint to be one of this against dreaded diseases? It's because in ancient times, the plague was believed to have been brought by the arrows of Apollo. Apollo, the god, who had the arrows and all that. So he became the chief saint. And because he was always presented as being a young man tied to a stake, he was actually then invoked as a saint for the plagues. Another story says that during the 8th century, there was a man in Italy, and it was revealed to him that to get over the plague, that they should honor Saint Sebastian by bringing an altar. So they started to build an altar and the pandemic disappeared. And so now he became the saint during plagues. Now he is always depicted as a young person, a young man, stripped and tied to a stake. Now this is different because Mantegna is actually one of the first Renaissance artists. If you start in the 15th century, the start of the early Renaissance, and Mantegna was actually from Padua in Italy. And he started studying the classics. And so he was also interested in architecture. So he presents this particular saint in tied to a stake with Roman architecture, pieces of antiquity behind him. Another saint that is still revered today as part of the pantheon of gods that you turn to during diseases and sickness is actually San Roque or Saint Roch. Actually, he is a Frenchman. He had the birthmark when he had a birthmark, and he believed this birthmark that made him consecrated to religious life. So when his parents passed away as a young person, he disposed of his worldly goods. He went and started to do missionary work. He ended up in Italy. And in Italy, he actually he was able to assist people in Italy, and they recovered from disease. Sorry, got distracted. When he had the plague himself, he went to the forest to die, but his dog brought him bread every day until he was able to recover. So actually in the Philippines, he's very familiar. If you go to churches, there's always a statue of San Roque, and you will always see him with a dog by his side. And then the skirt is lifted, his dress is lifted, and there's always a scar shown. And the scar is supposed to be a remnant of him surviving the plague. Now, my mistake earlier, it was actually not San Sebastian whose body was stolen by the Venetians, but this is actually San Rocco, whose body was stolen by the Venetians and brought to Venice. And there's a church named after him. It's called the Church of San Rocco in Venice, and you can visit here. Now, who was Tintoretto? Tintoretto was actually a Venetian also. Domenico Tintoretto came from a family of artists. His father was also very famous artist. And Tintoretto, actually, if you look at the period and style that he was working, he was more of a mannerist, and he was also, because of the elongated forms, and he was also dealing with chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro, you know, the light and dark, the opposition in there. And then he places him also in two pillars, Greek pillars, to give depth to the painting. Now, as we move on, I'm going to show you different, different pictures and different arts that was done during the time of this pandemic. And the next one is actually more, now we go into the Black Death, when these were being painted. This particular engraving is actually done by a German. I'm just showing you this because it was like the hospital of that period. A hospital was originally a place of rest. In those days, when you were sick, you actually went to the hospital to rest and die, not to get cured. So it was a different meaning. And then they would also, the evolution of hospitals, they would actually start as an accommodation for pilgrims and poor travelers. They're the famous pilgrim routes to Santiago de Compostela and all that. And these pilgrims would bring shells, and they would have they would look for places along the way. If you're coming, for example, from Italy, going all the way to Spain to rest. And so they would go to hospitals, which were actually accommodations for poor travelers. Later on, it became a welfare institution offering food, shelter, or spiritual or others physical care. In this particular engraving, the people sick would come in here, and then they would be going to different places, different parts of the building to rest. And if you are sick or dying, and if you're dead, actually, you would still be going out the same way. Jeremiah's Wolf was a German engraver. And this particular engraving, it falls around the Middle Ages already. And this particular engraving falls around the later, and this would be like the Renaissance period. The Middle Ages was before this, and this is when there was so much Black Death. There was so much death happening. The Black Death, So here, next we have Bruegel, Peter Bruegel the Elder, which is the Triumph of Death, which is in Madrid. Now, I'm going to show you a detail, especially of this part, but if you see the landscape, even the tonal values are very dark, brownish. So, there's that specter of death already. And then you see this giant, like a giant coffin over here, and then all these skulls. So you see here people dying, and these are people from all walks of life, the way Bruegel was showing them. Bruegel was actually coming from a family of artists from the Netherlands. And he was very good at portraying all these scenes. Now, this was also coming in because of the plagues that were happening in Europe. This is now the beginning of certain kinds of art. Like we will have now portrayals of Memento Mori, which I will show you later, or another one will be the Dance of Death or Dance Macabre. And now this one, actually these things also are related to literature. With the development of literature, because of the epidemics happening, art, or when I say art, the visual arts also started to portray what was happening around them. Okay, so Bruegel was depicted here. It's a barren landscape, and then you see Death leading his armies through the landscape, and all these people dying and with all sorts of diseases. this is the one that's interesting. Because of the Black Deaths plaguing through Europe, sorry, the Black Death toll was actually estimated at that particular time to be like 30 million. And in Venice, up to 60% of the population died. And they're saying that in Paris at that point, half of the population disappeared, that there were mass burial pits. Why am I showing this to you? I'm showing this to you because I'd like to show you, this is a doctor. You know, this was how doctors were dressed in those days. Now, a doctor in those days doesn't have to be like the ones that we see now, which is like a medical doctors. These are people, actually, they're not there to cure the sick. They're there to count the number of people affected by the epidemic. And they were so afraid of conducting it. So they would wear this, you know, long robe, this mask with a, you know, bird's beak, and then glass eyes, and then the hat. Now, the doctor would always be carrying a wand or stick because he was afraid of touching the people that were sick. So he would touch them by use of this stick. Now, what is this beak for? They would then put herbs or scents or fragrances so that they will not smell the smell of death when they visited the sick or the dying. So kinds of smells that they would put here, the scents they would put, the herbs would be like lavender or mint, you know, or juniper, things to take out the smell. These people were actually very well paid. Sometimes they were even kidnapped because, you know, there were cities that wanted them but couldn't have them all because of the demand for them. There was always a need for doctors. So they were actually, there's a particular case in Barcelona where there was a doctor that was kidnapped and a ransom was paid so he could be released to the city that needed him. Sometimes they would be paid 4 times the amount just so he could go to the place that needed him. And also, this was used in this particular habit or costume, you see, started to be used in the 17th century and used particularly in France and Italy. I'd like to tell you something about the Black Death. The Black Death was actually started in Asia. It went through Sicily via trade ships, and then it spread from there to Europe. Now, in those days, people attributed the Black Death to the divine being, to the devil, or because the people were so sinful. Also, the marginalized people decided were, what do you call this? They were also blamed. So sample of this were the Jews. So there were pogroms against the Jews. And then this is also where we get the word quarantine. Because in the port of Dubrovnik in Croatia, this, which was under Venice in those days, they established a 30-day quarantine for ships that were coming in from other parts of the world. These were ships that were, you know, being given isolation so that the plague will not spread. The original thing was 30 days, Trentino. Then it spread to other countries. When it spread to other countries, later countries adopted them to make it 40 days. So 40 days then became like the word for Italian for that is quarantino. So that's where we get the word quarantine. So in those days, they were already doing the quarantine. So this was like 800 years ago. And this is what we're still doing now. So, but this period of the Black Death was also a period where women became freer, where women can own property. Because many people died, a lot of men died, a lot of husbands and sons died. Women were then able to inherit the land or the businesses that their husbands or sons owned. And so they became freer also. And also the people who were servants, the lower class of society, were able to own land and were able to demand higher pay because there were fewer people to do the work. Also, this is also what was developing. This is called, the transi or the death, the tomb of René de Chalon. in France. And what is happening here? Now, René de Chalon died at the age of 25. This is, he actually wanted to be portrayed as he would be 3 years from his death. So he wanted to be portrayed as Corsier. So here, his body is imagined to have, decaying flesh and bones. So that's why he is portrayed as a skeleton. And it's also the first time that we have a standing, sculptural skeleton. And so this became like the basis for other things. Previous to this, people were actually, when they died, especially the ones of the upper classes, on their tombs would be statues or their bodies lying down. This one is a skeleton standing up, and also it's a skeleton. It is not a body of a person. Now, this is also the time where society was anxious over death, over war, over religious conflicts in Europe. This is a national monument in Paris. During World War I, it was actually moved to a place so that it would be safe from all the war and move back to its place after the war. This is also now the start of where we see all this memento mori, all this dance macabre, all these other things that remind people of the death that was coming, that was inevitable. An example would actually, this is another example. This is called the dance macabre. This is by Bernd Notke of Estonia. So when I say dance macabre, you see here, these are the skeletons dancing with the different people being portrayed, the noble classes of that particular society. It's actually very long. This is about 7 meters long. Then we come to something called vanitas. Now, vanitas painting or memento mori is usually a reminder for people that life is short, that life is transitory. So these are symbols of mortality. So here, the symbols of mortality can be rotting fruit, can be a dead bird, can be an hourglass, or in this particular case, a skull. So this is by Frans Hals. Frans Hals is a very well-known painter, Flemish painter, young man holding a skull. This is a vanity painting. Vanity, it comes from the Bible. The Bible, there's the book by Ecclesiastes. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it says, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So this is the vanitas painting. It's just simply saying that life is nothing, it's impermanent, it's temporary. So vanity paintings, or this kind of paintings, actually continued and continues up to this day. So I'm going to show you samples of that. Here we have a sample of even Van Gogh did this. Now, this is an early one. This is in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. Now, Van Gogh actually was showing a man with burning cigarette. Now, in this particular painting, this was his painting done as a student at the academy. So he was still studying in Antwerp then. And this one is one of the things that you do in art class is actually draw. And one of the drawing classes, you always have a skeleton. And so this was the basis for your anatomical studies, for your anatomical drawings later. And so this is basic, very basic to art classes then. So, but Van Gogh wanted to paint something different. He wanted to paint life, something. He was already going off tangent of what the academics were wanting from students then. So he decided to put a cigarette. And so this is just showing you, he was now trying to juxtapose life, which is the burning cigarette, with already someone that is dead, which is the skeleton, of course. Another person who was of the same period as Van Gogh was actually Cézanne. Now, this is trio of three skulls. This is one of the paintings of Cezanne which he does up close. Very detailed. When I say up close, because most of the time his paintings would be far away from you, the way it's set up and all. So this is exceptional because it is so close to us, the viewer. Now, this was done in the last decade of his life when he was looking more inwardly. He was starting to mortality. He was more and more looking at his mortality. And so most of the time too, his letters were always saying that, as for me, life has begun to be deathly monotonous, or I might as well be dead. And I don't have time to express myself. So this is when he starts looking inward. Another painter who also dealt with, memento mori and all that is Picasso. So here you can see his skull. And this is a period early in Picasso's life where he started to deal, when he started to question, the way art was represented. This is when he was starting to experiment with Cubism. Also, he was very much influenced by African art. In fact, the year before, 1907, he did this painting, landmark painting, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, which is now at the MoMA in New York. And this was where people say the start of modern art is that particular painting. And so here we can see that he is also breaking down. He is starting to look at life also. Also, he was very much influenced by primitive. When I say primitive art, this is art of Oceania, art of the Africans, as they referred to in those days. In our times, it's Damien Hirst. Now, this is believed to be the most expensive artwork ever done. Supposedly, Damien Hirst spent $28 million to do this artwork. Why is it that expensive? It's because of the diamonds on it. So it's like 1,000, like here, it says here, 1,100 carats of diamonds. And there are 8,600 pieces of diamonds. Now, apparently it sold for 100 million later. So it was a good investment for Damien Hirst. If you believe that, it was a good, the 28 million actually justified his spending for this particular artwork. The teeth is, human teeth is original to the skeleton where he got this from. The skeleton is platinum. The teeth were original to the skeleton. Now, that means the original skull. Also, when he started buying the diamonds to make this, the prices of diamonds started to go up in 2006, 2007, when he started to accumulate the diamonds. And the title actually, For the Love of God, came from an expression his mother told him. His mother told him, for the love of God, what will you do next? And so this is when he started to think about it. And for him, this is actually, if you look at it, this is a good thing for him, because even though death is a heavy subject, he made something that if you look at it, it doesn't look like death to you. It looks like something that you would admire or something you would wonder why he would do such a thing. Also, it's something that you can say, are you laughing at the face of death? Because here, even though it's supposed to represent a skeleton, these are diamonds. Diamonds are a worldly thing. Also, this is going with the belief of Damien Hirst that art collecting can give you something of an immortality, because you can spend your money on collecting art. You can buy art, you can build a collection, you can put your name on it. For example, the Spencer collection or something like that. You can put a museum. People come in for free if you want the museum. And it's as close as you can to mortality, because even if you pass away, people will always refer to that particular museum or that particular collection. So also okay, hers fascination with skulls actually began when he was still a teenager, and he started to go to the anatomy department of the Leeds Medical School to do this. I mean, to do some drawings of it. So hers is still alive. He still makes a lot of artwork. He still does artwork that is controversial. I don't know if you've heard of the work where he did the tank, where he did the shark inside the tank, and people were questioning whether it was really art or not. Another another pandemic that we can deal with is actually the Spanish flu. Now, the Spanish flu is actually named the Spanish flu not because it started in Spain, but because it was Spain that first reported the flu. It actually started in Kansas in the USA in an army camp. And then when they sent troops over to Europe for World War I, this is when it started to spread. Now, you know very much of Edvard Munch is a Norwegian. Of all the he was actually a very prolific painter. He had several works. When he passed away, people discovered in his house about 1,000 paintings, more 4,000 or so drawings, and about 15,000 prints, which he all did himself. But he was actually in isolation like the last 27 years of his life. He did not move much. He stayed in his house. And so he also was an alcoholic. He drank excessively. But for one particular image, if you know of the Scream, which Edvard Munch has been famous for, which he did in 1895, he also did several works. And this is one of his works. He survived actually the Spanish influenza, the Spanish flu, compared with other artists of that period. It is said that around 27% of the population during the particular era, which is 1919 during World War I, passed away because of the Spanish flu. And they're saying mortality rate was then 50 to 100 million. In the Philippines, during that time, we were under the Americans. We actually don't have any statistics. I was trying to look for statistics on how many people died in the Philippines during the Spanish flu, but we couldn't find any. Okay, so the Spanish flu was probably avian in origin. And it first went from Kansas, it went to France, and then it spread throughout Europe. Another pandemic, after that, there are other pandemics. We have, I will not deal with them, but more of the recent ones, and this is the AIDS. AIDS is actually a pandemic, and people around, a lot of people have passed away from AIDS. And this was actually, they think now AIDS started from a chimpanzee in West Africa in 1926. It spread to New York and San Francisco in the 1970s. And there are a lot. Keith Haring is actually, was a young man who passed away at 31 years of age, 1989. During that period, the 1980s, not much was known about AIDS. It was looked upon as a gay disease because most of the people who were affected were gays, because it was, it could spread through bodily fluids, through blood transfusion, and all that. Until now, there's no cure for AIDS, but you can have treatment which can slow the course of AIDS. So here, what is his silence of death? He shows up, this is because he was see nothing, hear nothing, and say nothing. This was actually, he was referring to the different groups or the different people who denied the existence of AIDS then, who could accept that there was such a thing. About 30 million have since died from AIDS. When Keith Haring realized he had AIDS, he started to become more active and started to he started to do a lot of artwork related to AIDS to raise funds for it. Keith Haring was actually, if you, in the 1980s, started to draw these kinds of figures. It's very familiar. I think you've seen a lot of his works. He started to draw them. He started to paint them in the subway system of New York. And because he saw that there were a lot of blank spaces, a lot of black spaces, it looked like a canvas, and he started to draw. In fact, in those days, he would be drawing, and people who would commute and use the subway would actually interact with him, you know, and ask questions when he was drawing. Then he opened up a shop in Soho in 1986. He started also selling his artwork. So it became very familiar. They became very popular, to the point that the people, you know, the old people who were used to the art world, selling in galleries and, you know, quietly, like the old type, were actually criticizing him. But he remained committed to the desire to have his artwork more available. So he kept his pop shop open. And so later on, right now, there's the Keith Haring Foundation that does this artwork and still does his works to sell for fundraising. Then we move to, this is another AIDS poster of Keith Haring. Then we move to, it's not only the West that does this also. So now we move to Japan. Japan, actually, there's a festival in Japan. I'm sorry, I cannot give you, I've been trying to look for a detail, but I cannot get a detail of this particular work that I wanted to show you, a particular scene. In Japan, in the 9th century, that was like 869, there was a particular plague. And so the people decided, it was, you know, July in Kyoto is very hot, it's very humid, there are rains, similar to the Philippines. So they believed then that there were angry spirits that were spreading illness. So they decided to have a ritual, which was to make peace with such spirits. The emperor ordered them to have a long spear, and you carry it upright, just like a procession. And because the next time the pentillion struck, the emperor ordered another one. So every time there was like plague or something like that, they would have this particular procession. And so and because Kyoto, every year, of course, we have this weather where it's hot, humid, and then they're prone to illness. So Kyoto began to develop this particular festival. And it's called the John Festival, which is still going until now, more than 1,000 years later. So this is particular screen. I want to show you another one, which was developed. This particular scene, this is the John Festival that's being shown here. And so in Japan right now, this is what it would look like. So if you go every time in Japan, it's July that it happens, but July 17 is when the particular festival is held. I mean, July 17 is the big festival, the big procession. This is when like floats, you know, similar to our processions here, are shown around Kyoto. And it lasts for, there are two processions, the 17 and the 24, but the 17 is the big one. The only time the procession was not held was during World War II. But every year it has gone. It has been there. For this particular year also, there will be no procession because of COVID-19. They canceled it. So this particular, there are about 20 floats that happen. And here in this particular scene by Iwasamate Bay, you can see that this is an Edo period, so 17th century painting. They're still depicting it. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to show you this particular scene. When you see Rakuju, Rakugai, that means scenes in and around Kyoto, most of the screens during this period will be depicting the John Festival. Now, what is happening in Japan these days? In Japan these days, there is now a belief, there's another particular artwork What is this? This is in 1860. This particular legend appeared. This is Amabie. It appeared in 1846. There's a legendary Japanese mermaid or merman with 3 legs. And so apparently they emerged from the sea to say whether we have an abundant harvest or an epidemic. So this particular legend happened in 1846, and so supposedly this yokai, which is a mythical figure, appeared in Kumamoto, Japan. So after the prediction, it would go back to the sea. And if apparently what that particular being said was, if there is an epidemic, draw a picture of me and show it to everyone so that people will not get sick, so that the epidemic will disappear. So that is when the likeness of this particular being began to spread. And now with the social media and all, and this has been revived. Of course, it is now more modern in rendition. So this is, they're hoping that the epidemic will disappear from Japan. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Jeannie. That was a humanities course cramped in about 30 or so minutes. Let me now call on our second speaker, Jack Teotico, for his presentation. Jack.
Hello, thank you, FINEX, for hosting this very interesting webinar. And thank you, Jeannie, for your very extensive talk. I'm in such a great company. Jeannie is one of the respected names in the art firmament, and Rico is one of the foremost collectors in the world.
You're not haven't started yet.
Right. Good evening. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, FINEX, for hosting this webinar. And I would like to say I'm very honored to be part of this group because Jeannie is one of the foremost scholars in the art scene, and Rico is one of the foremost art collectors in the country. But anyway, let me go direct to the point, considering the time frame. I would like to discuss this afternoon art in the post-COVID world. The first comment that I had about this, first thing I'd like to say is that, next slide, please. We have two possible scenarios. One is with a vaccine and with a cure. And hopefully with that, we all go back to the normal situation. It will take a few years, maybe, but then hopefully we can go back to business as usual. But the second scenario is, what if there is no vaccine? Or what if there is no cure? Many of you are already aware that dengue at the moment has no vaccine. There is a vaccine, but it's a controversial one. And AIDS at the moment also has no vaccine. And as Jeannie mentioned, 32 million people have already died from the AIDS pandemic, if you would like to call it that. Next slide, please. So I think I'd like to just go direct to the point and try to answer questions in your mind. Maybe some of you have questions like, what will happen to the art market? I think some of you are already involved in the art market, being art lovers or art collectors or art buyers, or some of you are just interested now. Now is a good time to think about art as any. So these are important questions, right? Recession or depression, maybe there might be a Great Depression. And would it have an effect on the art market? What would happen to your art collection if you have one? Or should you even start one? So I think I would like to say that the good news is that despite all the hardships and difficulties and the bad news that's happening, we have very solid fundamentals of the Philippine economy. We have had unprecedented positive growth, maybe averaging 6% a year for the past 5 years. And the Economist magazine ranks the Philippines as number 6 among the strongest emerging economies due to favorable public debt, foreign debt, cost of borrowing, and reserve cover positions. Actually, NEDA Director General Secretary Chua gave us a talk a few days ago, and he says that the Philippines is probably one of the most prepared economies. Well, of course, you can never be fully prepared, but it's one of the more stable economies when 2020 started. Of course, Taal came in, and now COVID is there. So we are, of course, facing a lot of very important challenges and difficulties. Next slide, please. Here, I will just go through this very, very quickly, but you will look at number 6. In terms of percentage of public debt to GDP ratio, the Philippines is in a good position. In terms of foreign debt, we don't have too much. The cost of borrowing in the Philippines is quite reasonable. The reserve cover is quite high. So the Philippines in this chart, which was done by The Economist and sourced from various banks and central banks, it shows you that the Philippines is actually even in a better spot than Thailand, number 7, China, number 10, Vietnam, number 12, Indonesia, number 16, Mexico, number 28, right? So next slide, please. So the question, I think, on a lot of people's minds is, will the importance of art be reduced? What will happen to art now in COVID or post-COVID? The good news is that art has been around since the beginning of human civilization. From the time that men started living in caves, they started drawing, or you could even say they started painting on their cave walls. And art is a reflection of society. It is a mirror of man's dreams, hopes, aspirations, and emotions. Art has been through many catastrophes. It has been through wars. It has been through economic turbulence, talking about World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Asian financial crisis, and as Jeannie has said in her talk, so many pandemics and plagues. And in fact, it even inspired a lot of disturbing, but actually it inspired a lot of great art. So I would like us to think of these 3 phrases. I think we should remember that art is essential. During this pandemic, many of us have realized that many of the things that we thought mattered to us didn't really matter. But what really mattered was food. Provided that we have food and we have our families behind us, beside us, we will survive. You know, that's the important thing. We have food at our table and we have our families around us. And I would like to postulate that art is essential and it is a necessity because art is food for the soul. It is food for our spirit. And so it is very important, even during times of pandemics like this. Next slide, please. Will the demand for art be affected? You know, that's the interesting thing. If you look through history, the demand for art, it shifts. Sometimes there's a demand for abstract art. There's a demand for impressionist art. And the interesting thing is during World War II, Hitler and his people, or his minions, if you could call them that, he decided that impressionist art was a bad and decadent art. Even the art of the German expressionists, he hated them. He thought they were decadent art. So what he did was he told his people, the Nazis, to get rid of them, to burn them, to sell them. And they had an art dealer in Switzerland called Galerie Fischer in Lucerne, who actually ended up selling a lot of the Impressionist and the German Expressionist collections. The prices went down for a while, but those that bought art at that time, a few years later, were able to sell that wonderful art at 50 times the value that they had gotten it for. So what will happen now to art in this COVID or post-COVID community situation? I think the first thing is that the difference between collectors and buyers will become more defined. You know, a collector of art has a relationship with his collection. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Rico's talk because Rico has one of the nicest art collections that you will see. So, you know, the collector will probably not unload his art even with a pandemic because it is part of him. It is part of his soul. It is his history. It is his psyche. So, but, you know, speculators probably might. So that goes to this third point that I have. If that happens, then this is a good time to do bargain hunting. You know, there will be some momentary hesitation due to the uncertainty and the anxiety. But in the end, good art is good art. And people will realize that now is the time to actually look for good art. I would like to postulate also that I feel that the prices and demand for works of the masters will remain firm. I mean, Amor Solos will be Amor Solos. You know, we have, I think, if I'm not mistaken, we have 14 visual artists for painting and a couple for sculpture. So the demand for their works, for instance, will be there. It's not going to go down. Maybe a little bit, some hesitation or uncertainty, but it will always be very important. And the interesting thing is that because we are all locked down and we don't know how long this will last, there is actually more purchasing power. The people who have been spending on travel, of course, I join all of you in hoping that the tourist industry bounces back at no time at all. But right now, there's no travel and there is no opportunity to wear our accessories or important designer clothes. And so, because many people's credit cards have not been moving so much, there is purchasing power to buy good art. So that would be on the demand side. Next slide, please. So you might be asking, what will happen to the art scene? Or what will happen to the art scene if there is no vaccine that is found, or if there's no cure, or even if there is, but it will take time? So you're probably asking, what will happen to art fairs? What will happen to auction houses or gallery openings, visits? I would like to think, you know, after World War after World War II, there was one important art gallery in the Philippines, just one, the Philippine Art Gallery by Lid Argilia. And then by the 70s, it had gone to about 5 art galleries. And today, there are hundreds of art galleries in the Philippines. So the important thing that happened since the 70s was the growth and sprouting of art galleries. And there are quite a number of them, and we're very excited, and we wish them well in this period. But in the past decade, or well, actually for Philippine contemporary art, it was actually a decade and a half ago. The next important thing after the sprouting of the galleries was the growth of the art fairs and the auction houses. Auction houses started taking an interest in Southeast Asian art. Sotheby's did this in 2004, and we were quite honored that they held their first 2 showings of Philippine art, both modern and contemporary, at Galerie Joaquin in San Juan in 2004 and 2005. So Sotheby's became very interested in Philippine art, in Southeast Asian art. Then Christie's followed. And then we had auction houses, local auction houses that are doing quite well. And we're very excited that they're doing well because these are the places where, you know, it becomes like an important market or secondary market for people to unload their art. Just aside from the galleries, they can unload their art to the auction houses. And then the art fairs. These are so important. You know, The Philippine art scene in terms of the art fairs is one of the most important in the region. I would like to postulate that after Hong Kong, the Philippine art fair, Philippine art fair scene, thanks to the three ladies that put up Art Fair Philippines and the people that put up Manila Art, and now there's a new art fair, the Alt Fair Philippines. You know, these are very important. Will they disappear? Well, let's ask ourselves the question, will Disney disappear? Will NBA disappear? Will Rolling Stones concerts disappear? Maybe in the short term, but in the end, you know, people will adjust. Like people have adjusted to dengue and AIDS. People will learn to live with it and work around it. And there will come a time, maybe not in the next week or so or the next few months, but art fairs will come back. Will gallery openings still be around? Yes, they will still be around. Maybe on a smaller scale. It won't be as large as they used to be because we have to practice social distancing. Will gallery visits be affected? You can always have appointments with your galleries. I think what will happen in the art scene in COVID and post-COVID era, the new and most important word in art will be trust. People will have to trust their gallery. People will have to trust the artists that they collect. So, you know, because for you to be able to buy art online, which will be the new format, you will have to have trust in your artist, the artist you're buying, and trust in that art gallery. There will be new forms of art and art movements because the Impressionists, the German Expressionists, even the abstract artists of Jackson Pollock's time, they all came about because of economic and social changes. So will there be new art that will come out after COVID? Probably yes. I think so. And I'm very excited to look forward to that. If you ask me, I think the best art is yet to come. There will be new opportunities for young and emerging artists because of the internet, because of social media. But I think galleries, art fairs, and auction houses will still play an important role. Because, why? Because people need to see the art. Even though they have trust in the artist or trust in the gallery, there are some art that you still want to see together, or some art that you want to see firsthand. So the galleries, houses, the auction houses, the art fairs, they will still have a very important role to play. Next slide, please. So what will be the new normal in art transactions? I think there are three words. It will be online, online, online. I think there will be a lot of information that will be shared online. There will be a lot of business transactions that will be done online. There will be a lot of announcements that will be done online. You know, there's Facebook, there are other social media, websites to choose from, and there will be more marketing platforms to choose from. Galleries and the buyers will have to agree to easier payment methods. It cannot be complicated. Online banking is a new reality, and I think that maybe because of this, this pandemic, maybe 80 to 90% of the people in this webinar are actually exploring or already doing online banking. Will there be competition? I think there will be more competition. There will be fierce competition. So that should be something very exciting to look forward to. And I think the new normal that should happen is that we have to assure that our clients and collectors are safe. If we can assure them of safety, you know, the clients and collectors in our art exhibits, in our art fairs, in our auctions, they'll come back. We cannot forever lock ourselves up. I think we will have to navigate to this new normal and probably go out wearing masks, sanitize regularly, make sure that we are a few feet away from our neighbor. But I think slowly we have to make sure that life goes back to normal. Next slide, please. So to sum up my talk, is art essential to humanity? The answer is yes. It is very important. And more than ever, I think the next speaker will even emphasize even how more important it is. Will art survive the COVID-19 pandemic? Yes. I think it will even be stronger. We'll even have more good art, more exciting art. Um, Before I end this, after the summary, I will go back to I will ask the Secretariat to go back to the first slide. Not yet now, in a while, yeah. Because as early as now, artists are already pushing themselves and exploring how to express what they are feeling, what they are expressing. This is an artwork by the renowned contemporary artist Juanito Torres. This is his painting called Tagumpay. And you can see that he is optimistic that we will all triumph over the COVID disease. The first artwork that I showed in the presentation was an artwork that Juanito Torres also did. It's titled Darating Din ang Bagong Umaga. It shows the frontliners as heroes, but the COVID disease. And there were two other artworks which were done by Juvenal Sanso, because Sanso was a man who was tortured by Japanese and who went through so much difficulty in World War II. That's why his early paintings were dark, they were morose, they were, a bit grotesque or gruesome or pained. But then after that, he found himself and he came up with some of the most beautiful paintings that you will see when he healed and he did his period of jubilation paintings. Will it be business as usual for the Philippine art scene? Maybe not. Maybe we have to adjust to the new realities until things get back to normal with a cure or with a vaccine. But we will climb back. We will get there. Business, even talking from wearing a business economist hat, business has always been a cycle. So maybe the art scene might have a slight a bump on the road, but it will come back and it will come back even more stronger. Should I buy more art? I will send FINEX several art links, articles from international magazines that will give you ideas and perspectives about the art market. And actually, Contemporary Art magazine of New York actually said in an article, and I found it quite interesting, should I buy more art? The answer was yes. And they even said you should buy as much as you can. Okay, so I remain realistic. I don't think that we are back to that the good old days where the demand for art was so intense and so extreme. But I think that we are not going to lose the art market. I think it is going to be, it might rest a little bit, but it's going to become back even more, maybe stronger. And so please remember what I said, that art is essential, art is important to humanity, and art is food for the soul. So perhaps we can go back to the first slide just to show you what I mean before I end my talk. The opening slide. Just 10 more seconds, Malu. This is the artwork done by Juanito Torres. I would like to say that there is an art magazine, Art Plus magazine, is going to be hosting an all-important art exhibit of COVID-related art. And they are going to put that into a book. And the title of the exhibit that they're putting together, hopefully to be launched before Philippine Independence Day, our independence from COVID, is going to be titled A Brave New World. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your time. It's been such an honor for me to address this forum. I would be happy to answer questions should you have any. later in the question and answer. Back to you, Malu.
Thank you, Jack, for assuring us that the art market is here to stay and for adopting a very upbeat tone. We move on now to our third speaker. Let me call on Rico Hizon for his presentation.
How's that?
Good afternoon, Philippines. Good afternoon, world. Good afternoon, FINEX. Thank you so much for having me for this afternoon's webinar. And my topic is all about art during the time of pandemic. I mean, it's great to be with all of you this afternoon, and I learned so much from the talk of Ginny and the talk earlier of Jack. But of course, before I begin my, well, not really a presentation because I don't really have a PowerPoint presentation. I just like to give you some background on how I really started collecting art. And it was way back in 1991. I was a reporter for GMA News, and it was really all by accident. I was asked to cover this art exhibit of Benedicto Ben Cab Cabrera at the Luz Gallery in 1991, and the focus was basically about the Mount Pinatubo eruption. And when I didn't really know anything about art, I didn't love art, I didn't really appreciate art. But when I entered that gallery for that exhibition, I was able to connect with the artworks because I covered the Mount Pinatubo eruption during that time. And with all my savings, my salary, I bought one artwork, and it was entitled Boy Afraid of Tremors. And since that time, I fell in love with art, and that's how my collection started. And of course, as mentioned by Ginny and Jack, art will always encompass any pandemic, epidemic, or economic turmoil during our time, during our generation or life. Because since I started collecting art, we went through the Mount Pinatubo eruption, you had the 1997 Asian financial crisis, you had the 2003-2004 SARS, and then after that, the 2008 global financial crisis, and then now we have this 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. And all through those peaks and valleys in the economic cycle, art survived, art lived on. And since I started collecting way back in 1991 and until today, my wife and I, Melanie, always have, how would you call this, agree on the types of artworks that we want to collect. And as you can see, I have an artwork behind me right now, which is Elmer Borlongan. And, you know, since we've been on ECQ, we've been really appreciating the artworks that we have around us in our home. Taking a look at the beautiful colors, taking a look at the expression on the faces of the characters, and looking at the different hues, the palettes of the artist. So during this ECQ or this lockdown, my wife and I and our son have really appreciated more the artworks that we have purchased over the past years. And like us collectors, when we see a beautiful artwork, we take a look at it from a distance and we say, oh, I can really connect with that artwork without really trying to find out the background or the history of the artwork. But now that we have these artworks around us, we even call the artists and we ask them, how did you come up with this idea? Why did you use this color? Why did you use this character? How did it all come about? So that is, I think now we really appreciate more during this pandemic what art is really all about. We get to read more about the artists, about their backgrounds, and their inspirations. Like, for example, Elmer Borlongan here, his main inspiration was one of our great artists during our contemporary period, Onib Olmedo. And of course, you have Marcos Tignani. You have also the likes of Jose Santos III, who are all part of the Salimpusa group. So you tend to talk to artists and get closer to them and really find out the heart and soul of each of the artworks that they produce. And I was even telling my wife while we were having merienda, take a look at that. Why was that particular work of Jose Santos III made this way? Why is Jose Rizal composed in this manner when he's on the right hand side of the painting, when he should be in the middle, because he should be the focal point of the painting? So this is where we really appreciate and start to really love the artworks that we collect through the years. Because as collectors, and I'm sure like Jack and Jenny, who are also art collectors, sometimes there are collectors out there that just really buy artworks that they see, that are available in the market, or that they see online, and they appreciate it from the time that they see it on just a photograph, which my wife and I have done many times, no? Because we've lived in Singapore for more than 20 years, and we haven't really been able to attend a lot of the art exhibitions here in the Philippines. Sometimes when we see an artwork just from an email or photograph, we say, oh, that is a beautiful artwork. You know, we immediately connect with it. Why? Because we love the way it was composed, the way the colors that were used, and you know how we even know personally the artist and how the artist came about with the theme and the concept. So my wife and I are basically lovers of figurative works, whether it be surrealism, impressionism, or hyperrealism. We really like to collect figurative artworks, and that we have done over the past 20 years. That's why most of our collection, well, we cannot really currently show you these artworks because we just basically moved from Singapore just right before the lockdown. And if I really had more photographs of our artworks, I would really love to show these works to all of you today. But the core of our collection basically was how it all started way back in 1991, and it is BenCab. And we have also collected in the past Malang, ang Kyukok. But we have also, because of me being just a journalist, we have also avoided the likes of Omorsolos or the Manansalas or the Legaspis because of the very high prices. So what we've really done is that during the time we are here in Manila and we get to visit a lot of reputable galleries, we've taken a look at the young artists. And since we started collecting in the 90s, all the way up to 2000, 2010, and then till today, we've taken a look really at a lot of the young contemporary artists of that time, from Marcel Antonio to Marcos Tignani, Jose Santos, Elmer Borlongan, Rodel Tapaya, and his wife, Marina Cruz, Jose Santos's wife, Pamian Santos. You also have Wire Tuason. You have a lot of these young contemporary artists in the 90s have now become superstars in the contemporary art scene. And my wife and I are really blessed to have started collecting them when they were still starting. And it would be really my wife, Melanie, who really had the eye for art, would tell me, Rico, take a look at that work. I said, and I would always tell myself, why? What do you like about it? And then she would explain it to me. And that work right now that we have is of Jose Santos III. And another work would be from Marcos Tignani. So we are collectors basically that do not hoard artworks. We are very discerning art collectors. If we do not agree totally on one particular artwork, then we will not buy it. We have both to agree 99.9% that it is an artwork that we both love and appreciate. And this is for art collectors who are watching us right now. Each and every one of you will have your different tastes. Each and every one of you would have your different feel of different artworks. Maybe one would just like surrealism, figurative, or maybe abstract. But I would like to advise you that you both have to agree on the artworks that you like. Because when you see it up on your respective walls at home, when you go home, you would say, oh, this artwork was well worth it that we both bought it together. Because if you both disagree, then you might want to sell the artwork. My wife and I have been collectors for more than 20 years, me for close to 30 years. And a lot of the artworks we continue to hold since the 1990s. And because we really truly love the artworks, and behind the artworks, we also truly love and appreciate the artists who paint them. So I think that is one of the most important things, is when a husband and wife start collecting, or when an individual starts collecting. You just don't buy it because he's a famous artist. You just don't buy it because it was recommended by an art dealer or a friend. You have to collect an artwork, even though the artist is totally unknown to you. It's because you love the subject matter, you love what it looks like. And when you go home, even though it's worth just 1,000 or 5,000 pesos, you know that it was an artwork that was well worth its purchase, and that's well worth part of your collection. So I suggest that before you buy an artwork, you really think about it, and that you do your research about each and every artist. Just don't buy the artwork because you're being pressured by an art dealer or pressured by a fellow art collector, but you really have to like each and every artwork. And that is basically the pillar of how my wife and I collect artworks through all these years. So now in our home, we are all very happy that we have these artworks. There has been no shred of doubt whatsoever that we bought these artworks. And we also teach our 15-year-old son, Migo, to really appreciate these artworks, because we want him to continue collecting and to continue the legacy of our collection, that we really appreciate artists and we appreciate their artworks. And I believe that art will continue to be, the art market will continue to be strong past this COVID-19 crisis. I've been speaking to a lot of artists. I've been having Zoom chats with them, messenger chats, and they've also been showing me their artworks that they have been inspired because of this ongoing health crisis. The frontliners who have inspired them during this ongoing pandemic. And that is what we love about Filipino artists. They have a lot of heart. They have a lot of soul. They look at inspiration, at Philippine history. Having lived overseas for more than 20 years, and having lived and worked in London, in Hong Kong, and in Singapore, we've seen all kinds of art across the board. And we realized that there's so much soul in Filipino art. We've been egged on. We've been told to buy Chinese art, which are now in the millions of dollars. But my wife and I have committed to just support Filipino artists, and no more, no less. And we've bought in the past a few international artists But my wife, Melanie, and I have decided that we will just focus on the Philippine art market. Even though we don't get the best pieces, but we know that we are supporting Filipino artists, whether they are known or not known, because we know that each artist has really put their minds and their hearts into every artwork that they produce. And that is what we love about the artworks that we have collected through the years. They are not copied, they are original, and they really come from the heart of every Filipino artist that we collect. So we will definitely, the art market will definitely survive this COVID-19 pandemic. My wife and I are always on the lookout for artworks that are available out there, especially now that many of the themes are about the Philippines, the healthcare crisis, the frontliners, even a painting that was shown to us about the conflict between the Philippines and China over the South China Sea. So Filipino artists really have vast knowledge about history. And that is what we love about the Filipino artists. And that's what we will continually love about Filipino art. And we will always support Filipino art, come what may, through peaks and valleys of this health or economic turmoils in our period and in our generation. So I hope I was able to give you some knowledge about what it's like for art during the time of the pandemic. So if you're watching right now and you have artworks around you, appreciate these artworks. Take a look at each and every one of them and ask yourself, what do these artworks mean to me? And why did I buy these artworks? And why is it part of my collection? Thank you very much. And I do hope I was able to help you in one way or another during this webinar, and what art would look like during this these challenging times of our lives. Thank you very much.
Rico. Thank you, Rico, for the passion that we could feel and see and hear in your presentation. Just very quickly, I'll call in Leah San Juan as my co-moderator, Leah. But before I ask her to put in her question, Rico, just one question. When you collected your art, for every painting that you buy, does the value appreciation not get into your decision making?
No, not at all. Because when my wife and I would buy these artworks way back in the 1990s, like the Mark Justinianis and the Jose Santoses, or the Elmer Borlongans, or the Ben Cabs, we never really thought of the appreciation. What we thought was this piece of art would fit in our living room, in our dining room, in our master's bedroom, or in our son's bedroom. We never really thought of the appreciation. We just appreciated the work for what it is. And at that time, they were just 20, 30, 40,000 pesos. And you know what? We are blessed that these artists have become truly successful in their craft, today.
Just a follow-up question. There's a question from one of the attendees who wants to know if you ever part with your collection. Have you sold any of your paintings?
We never part with our collection. My wife and I really love each, because 99.9% of the time we always agree on the artworks. Yes, maybe in the past we've sold maybe one or two artworks, but that was when we were still very young and learning about the whole process of art collecting. But now we haven't really sold any artworks over the past years. We just continue to collect.
We're extending a bit of our time because we realize that the breadth and the depth of the subject matter and the expertise of our speakers demand that we extend that time. So Leah, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question from one of our attendees. I think this is more addressed to Jack. What do you think will happen to young artists at this time? Do you think people will continue to support them? And related to that, does your gallery provide assistance or any help to your stable of artists during these trying times? Jack, I think you're still on mute.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Leah. To the person that asked that question, thank you also very much. You know, these times are very interesting, even for, especially for young artists, I would think, you know, because it's like YouTube. It's like how many people have been discovered through YouTube? They realized they didn't need the recording studios or recording companies anymore, right? So what happened was they make a good video, they post it, and then they become famous. Even vloggers, they become quite famous by expressing their own opinions. They didn't need, established broadsheets or magazines. They had their own blog, and then they become uh, endorsers. So that's what's going to happen too. You know, the good artists, they put it online and they get noticed. They could get noticed quickly. They will jump the line. Before when I was with the Saturday group, and I was quite close to Mr. Cesar Legaspi, and he and I had a nice conversation before. And he was telling me, it's the step by step to become an established artist is not easy, because at that time they couldn't even make a living by being a full-time artist in the 60s. They had to have a day job, because they needed that day job to be able to work and earn a living, bring food to the table, and they can paint at night and on weekends. But now, the young artists, they get noticed, they will get noticed, and they could have a career. But of course, the galleries and the art fairs and the auction houses are still going to be very important, because the galleries usually have a program for the artist's development. And some of these artists, when they get noticed, they join a reputable gallery and they become loyal to that gallery. I think loyalty is also very important, because some artists have the mistake. They think that the more people they blast their art to and they sell to on Facebook, they become more famous and they sell more. It's actually counterproductive. You know, when you overexpose yourself, you actually end up not being successful. To the second question, does our gallery support? Yes, we do. In fact, it's very important to give subsidies to artists, or even cash advances, or help them acquire their art or sell it for them during this period of lockdown. But it still continues. The world is continuing. The world is moving. I hope that answers the question.
I have a question for Jeannie. Jeannie, your Jeannie, when I was looking at the pictures that you showed during various times of pandemics, the paintings were very morbid, very macabre, and I was wondering whether there is any uplifting that art should have during times of great anxiety and distress.
Art was being produced both as, like you said, morbid, at the same time it was uplifting. If you think about the Renaissance, a lot of the paintings I showed you was during the Renaissance. And you have works by Michelangelo, by Da Vinci, and these were people doing the art also. So you can say there's a juxtaposition. And also now you can see that there are works that are being produced that we'll probably see works about the pandemic, the COVID-19. At the same time, there are works that are joyful that will be produced by these artists.
Leah, you have another question?
Well, there's a question here from one of our participants addressed to Jack. She's asking, how extensive is your art collection, Jack? How much art do you do you have stored that
Inventory.
that you don't intend to
Um,
sell but to keep?
yeah, you know, a friend of mine before, I, I did go through some financial difficulties during the Asian financial crisis, and I had to sell some of my art collection at that time, which I had gotten from my colleagues in the Saturday group of artists. But then my friend told me when I was so depressed and so sad, and of course, you know, Rico's correct. As a collector, you never want to sell even a single artwork in your collection because they're part of you. They're part of your life, your history. But you know, my friend told me, alam mo, Jack, don't feel so bad because, you know, you don't have to own a painting to appreciate it. And that's true. That's why museums are there. That's why we can go to a museum and sit and observe and watch and appreciate the painting. I also want, you know, Rico made a very interesting point because somebody, I think somebody asked him, did he say that, do you do you buy because you're thinking of the appreciation of the value of the painting? You know, a real collector will not use that as a criteria for buying an artwork. You know, you become a speculator, but if you're a collector, you're talking about your sense of values, even the colors you choose, the figures or the, if it's an abstract art, the patterns that matter are personal. They're subjective to you or in Rico's case, to him and his wife. You know, they're very important to the collector. And so if that's part of you, how can you sell it, right? So how much art do we have in our collection? Well, I think it's good enough. You know, it's we have some important artists too. Oh, it's important too. Some important artists through the years, and hopefully we can leave some of that to our children. The important thing also is that the artworks are assets. Like I said, the value, the biggest value of the artwork is not the financial value. It's the psychic, the intrinsic, and the emotional value that it gives the collector. And that's the important. So don't buy an artwork because it's going to appreciate. Nobody can tell you that. We're not Madame Auring, you know. You buy an artwork because it talks to you. That has been our gallery's principle from the beginning. And so far, we've had quite a number of happy collectors because of that tenet and that principle.
So if you buy art because of the appreciation in value, you're just a buyer. But if you acquire art because of how it resonates to you, then you're a collector. Because you did a distinction
Ah,
between collector and buyer.
well, yeah. So of course, you know, even in stocks, diba, some people who buy stocks buy because they totally believe in that company, right? Because it's a blue chip, you know, and then their families have been loyal to that particular company from the beginning. But there are also speculators and buy. There's nothing wrong. Oh, please don't get me wrong. There is nothing wrong with that. You know, I came from an investment bank, so there's nothing wrong if you want to buy an artwork because you want your money to appreciate. And in fact, through life, I've learned that there are two things that have been quite stable, not meaning to knock down the other investments, but real estate and art have been the important, you know, pillars or more reliable investments if you look at it that way. But the biggest investment is in your soul, is in your heart, and that is priceless.
Okay. Final words from the three of our speakers. I will start with Jeannie, then Jack and Rico.
Well, thank you everyone for listening to this very interesting topic also. And I'd like to say during this time of pandemic, art is what will keep you alive.
That's nice. Jack?
Yeah, well, art is essential, art is important, art is food for the soul, and let's look at it that way. And I would like to say I'm very honored to have been part of such a distinguished panel, and I'd like to thank FINEX for inviting. Hopefully there will be more seminars or webinars like this in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you. Rico?
Well, thank you so much, Phoenix, for having me this afternoon. Collect art because you love it. That is the motto of me and my wife. Love it, appreciate it, and not because you want to speculate on it. Thank you very much.
Okay. On that note, can I call on the chairman of the Arts Committee, Domingo Go, for the closing remarks? Domingo?
Good afternoon, dear FINEX colleagues and friends. We live truly in unprecedented times, and this has proven to be most challenging to many, if not all sectors of society, artists included. And yet, though their craft and livelihoods have been badly affected, with many events, shows, productions, venues canceled or closed for the remaining of the year, artists are among those who stand out during this most challenging period. Many have shared their craft via live stream or webinars such as this one. The Cultural Center of the Philippines, for instance, has announced that it will carry out a post-traumatic program intended to heal those who might have been psychologically affected by the pandemic, called the Arts for Therapy program, with modules on arts for mental wellness, as well as arts for healing activities. All these are carried out not only to help raise funds in some instances, but also in so doing to give us a most important gift, which is hope. Hope in the oneness and commonality of humanity to survive and eventually overcome this crisis. On this note, on behalf of the FINEX Foundation and its Arts Committee, I would like to thank our speakers for today, Ms. Regina Mercedes Cruz, Mr. Joaquin Teotico, and Mr. Rico Hizon, for sharing their valuable time and insights with us. I would also like to thank Malu and Leah for acting as the MC and the moderator for today. I would like to believe that we all have found this session today to be not only most interesting, but also enlightening. And thank you also to all those who took time out to attend this webinar. Do enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Rico.
Thank you, everybody. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. So we'll thank you all and we'll say bye-bye. Salamat po.